Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're unpacking a really fascinating recent Sky News Australia interview with One Nation leader Pauline Hanson. We're going to break down exactly how minor political parties design their strategies to wield some seriously outsized influence in Parliament. Whether you follow politics obsessively or you just want to understand the mechanics of how a handful of seats can literally steer national policy, you are in the right place. We'll be looking purely at the statements, the strategies, and the figures presented in this interview to map out exactly how a modern power broker operates.
Okay, let's dive right into this. On our agenda today, first up, the strategy itself. Then we'll hit immigration caps, climate concessions, those recent gains down in Victoria, and finally, the debate over returning citizens.
All right, Section 1, the power broker strategy, gaining leverage in Parliament.
To actually get that leverage, Hanson is eyeing a wave of new lower house MPs at the next election, and she wants veteran leadership like Barnaby Joyce to help guide them. But the real core of her tactical playbook, it all comes down to this. She states, "We would offer supply and confidence, but we don't want the ministry. What we will want is policy." Now, this is a highly calculated move. By explicitly saying no thanks to fancy ministerial positions, One Nation avoids getting tangled up in the strict rules of a formal coalition. It keeps their hands totally free to negotiate hard on specific issues.
Now, if you don't breathe parliamentary procedure every single day, and let's be honest, who does? Let's quickly break this down. A supply and confidence agreement is a massive deal in parliamentary democracies. Supply simply means voting to pass the government's budget so they can literally spend money and keep the lights on. Confidence, on the other hand, means supporting the government against any votes designed to topple them. So, in exchange for providing this ultimate political safety net, the minor party gets to extract some serious policy concessions.
And who is this tactical alliance aimed at? Well, Hanson stated point-blank in the interview that her overarching objective in offering this supply and confidence deal to a potential coalition government is to remove the current Labor, Greens and Teal government from power.
Moving right along. Section 2. Immigration and housing priorities. Setting the limits.
Okay, so once that leverage is actually locked in, the very first major policy condition they're pushing is a strict limit on immigration. Now, this got a little interesting during the interview. It was pointed out that one of Hanson's own newly minted candidates had actually suggested keeping the immigration figure at 306,000, citing a desperate need for international workers and backpackers for local farms and abattoirs. But Hanson publicly corrected this on the spot. She unequivocally stated that the party's official policy is a hard cap of exactly 130,000.
And she lays out the rationale for this hard cap as a pretty straightforward two-step process. Step 1, enforce that 130,000 limit. Step 2, keep that strict ceiling in place until the domestic housing crisis is totally resolved. She explicitly links high migration numbers to Australians living in tents and cars, making the argument that the focus just has to be entirely on housing availability and pushing local citizens to fill those regional job vacancies instead of relying on an overseas workforce.
All right, Section 3, climate policy concessions, the non-negotiables.
So the crucial point here is that if a major party actually wants One Nation's support to form a government, they're going to face a very specific ultimatum on the environment. And guys, these are not minor tweaks. Hanson is demanding the complete abolition of the Department of Climate Change, a total exit from the International Paris Agreement, and entirely dropping the net zero by 2050 targets. Interestingly, she also made the claim during the interview that Barnaby Joyce actually supports her stance on these specific issues.
To justify tearing down these major international and domestic climate initiatives, she leans heavily into the economics of it all. She argues that current climate policies have basically failed to actually change the climate, all while putting Australia in a highly precarious spot when it comes to fuel and electricity stability. In her view, it's essentially destroying any chance of bringing large-scale manufacturing back home to Australia.
Next up, Section 4, gaining ground in Victoria, state-level warning shots.
Now, to really understand this federal leverage, you kind of have to look at the momentum happening on the ground. Take the recent Nepean by-election in Victoria, for example. Just look at this number, 25%. In the previous election, One Nation captured less than 4% of the vote in that electorate. Jumping to 1 in 4 voters is a massive statistical surge. For Hanson, this isn't just a win, it's a giant warning shot fired right at the major parties, especially the Liberals, signaling that minor parties are successfully sweeping up frustrated voters.
And what's exactly driving those voters away? Well, Hanson points straight to a specific financial grievance, Victorian state debt. She cites a truly staggering figure of $190 billion. That's billion with a B. She uses this massive number to argue that the major political parties have basically lost their grip on economic management, which in turn is pushing voters to look for alternatives like One Nation.
But it's not just the economy. Alongside those economic arguments, there's a really strong law and order narrative at play here. Hanson highlighted a claimed shortage of 3,000 police officers. She connects this severe understaffing directly to local police stations closing down and an escalating crime rate, framing the whole situation as a fundamental failure by the state government to keep its citizens safe.
Beyond the debt and the policing issues, Hanson rounded out the local grievances driving that 25% surge with a couple of other key points. She called out high land taxes that penalize property owners and the really controversial resuming of agricultural farming land just to build power transmission lines. It's essentially a highly targeted cocktail of localized economic and social issues, purposely designed to peel voters away from the traditional majors.
And finally, Section 5, Stance on Returning Citizens, the ISIS Brides Debate.
This brings us to easily the most highly charged segment of the whole interview. The interviewer brought up some very specific financial figures from security sources about the cost to taxpayers if these individuals are brought back from Syria. And the estimates? They are stark. We're talking $2 million per person every single year just to maintain 24/7 surveillance, which requires 2 dedicated officers. And if they enter the community, general welfare assistance could tack on another $45,000 per person annually. Hanson noted that initial intelligence suggested they might be housed at the Silverwater Center, and she expressed some profound anger at the idea of taxpayers footing this massive ongoing security bill.
When it comes to policy, Hanson's response to these figures is absolute zero tolerance. Her exact words were, "I don't trust them. They're not compatible with their cultural way of life. I don't want them here." She argues that repatriating them basically sends a dangerous message to other radicals, the idea that you can leave the country, join an extremist group, and still expect to be safely welcomed back.
And when the interviewer specifically pressed her on the kids involved, who advocates often frame as innocent victims deserving compassion, Hanson completely rejected that framework. She asserted that the children pose an equal cultural risk, claiming they've been exposed to extreme violence and that a hatred of Australian culture is, as she put it, inbred into them.
So what does this all mean? Which brings us to our final thought today. We've seen the mechanics at play here, the total rejection of ministries, the strategic use of supply and confidence, and a whole list of hardline, non-negotiable demands covering everything from immigration and climate to national security. The real question we have to ask ourselves is this: how will the non-negotiable ultimatums of minor power brokers ultimately reshape the policy platforms of Australia's major political parties? Because as we're seeing, when minority parties hold the keys to power, the fringes can often dictate the center. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.